Joining me now is our next newsmaker, Surjit Bhalla, Executive Director for India at the International Monetary Fund. Really appreciate your time, Professor Bhalla. The RBI, in a report published in June, linked the precarious state of state finances to freebies, particularly the power subsidies. And last week, we have seen how the Supreme Court has entered this debate. Has the time come to stop freebies altogether?
Look, I think maybe the time had come a long time ago. Freebies do not have any place in a modern economy like ours and what we aspire to. Recall that I think it was 4 or 5 years ago when AAP came to power again in Delhi, and they brought in free water supply to everybody, as long as you consume less than 274 liters a day. And I had got into that debate. I had written that this was the average consumption for all households. Now, why in the world would you give free power to rich households? It doesn't make any sense whatsoever. So I had said so then, and I say so again today.
Okay. Professor Bhalla, I want to understand from you what, according to you, constitutes good and bad freebies, and what are the economic rationale behind them and fiscal consequences? Or is this debate more political?
First of all, a good freebie is a contradiction in terms, an oxymoron. Now, that doesn't mean that all subsidies are bad. If you have targeted subsidies, that is very good and efficient. Now, let me give you an example of what I think are targeted subsidies. For a very long time, I have been a major critic of both the PDS and the NREGA program, jobs program. Now, recently I wrote an article along with 2 others on saying how the PDS system had really helped India avoid the crisis for the poor. The pandemic, its worst effects were contained by not only providing those food subsidies, but also increasing them. Now, what changed? What changed was that the PDS system back in 2004 was reaching only 25% of the intended beneficiaries. And remember, at that time, everybody could access the PDS system. So that's an example of a very bad, non-targeted subsidy. In 2011, the targeting increased to 50%. Again, very bad. Now, starting in 2014, with the new law, and regardless of whether one agrees with the food security law or not, and we can discuss that, the targeting nevertheless increased in efficiency to something like 80 to 90%. Now we should debate, okay, so we've got the administrative setup to provide food to the needy. Now, the interesting debate now is, now that the crisis is over, should you provide food subsidies via the PDS system, which involves a lot of inefficiencies, or should you just provide, rather than to 75% of the population, which is what the PDS system or the food security law does, provide to the bottom 30%. You can double the amount of money that the poor and still come out ahead. So in other words, I can quite understand when supply constraints are there, you're not allowed to walk in the streets and so on and so forth, to provide food to the needy. But it is a bit of a stretch to think that 75% of the population are in need of food subsidies.
Okay.
And that 100% of the population, at least in Delhi, is in need of water, free water, not to mention free electricity and other such freebies that abound in the Indian landscape.
Okay, then Professor Bhalla, how do you look at this argument that Prime Minister Kisan Yojana, which gives rupees 1,000 a year to every farmer, is no different from Aam Aadmi Party's electricity subsidy to the poor?
Very good question. Look, the 6,000 rupees subsidy or income transfers, first of all, it is a more efficient form of subsidy than the going through the food subsidy, in-kind subsidy. That's the first point. Second point, should all farmers be getting that income transfer? No. Again, I think that started back in 2019. Perhaps every government tries out things on an experimental basis. I think we now have reached a stage where the bureaucracy is very efficient in targeting subsidies. We saw that with the food subsidies that we just talked about. So I think we now should look at income transfers to the poor, and the poor are no longer defined to be the 5% of the population, which the Food Security Act defined it as that. But I would think somewhere around 25%, a quarter of the population, and we do give them, whether they be farmers or non-farmers, we provide targeted income transfers to them. That is the way to go. So remember, what you want to do is to provide support to the bottom 25 and maybe the bottom third of the population.
Okay.
That's a political decision, but I don't think there is any reason for it to be more than a third. Then you decide on how much income support they need. Not in kind, just straight cash transfers. And that's a political decision, I agree. But the method of doing it is via income transfers, not via in-kind subsidies.
Okay,